Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. On today's show, I brought on a special guest, Adam Carroll. Through the use of the SHRED method, Adam paid off his home in record time, saving over $180,000 in interest in the process. He's here to share his strategy with us in an effort to help people free themselves to be themselves. Adam has published 4 books and produced an award-winning documentary on student loan debt. More than financial freedom, Adam is all about helping people achieve time freedom, relationship freedom, and service freedom. Adam, welcome to the show.
Marc, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you.
Great. I'm looking forward to today's topic. I think with the economy, the markets all over the place, inflation running so high, people are really getting in tune to where their money's going and how they can make improvements to it.
I could not agree more, Marc. In fact, I think when there's so much uncertainty in the market, I mean, we're facing what could be the next, who knows, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years of somewhat sideways market fluctuations, that what do you do? Where do you put your money and how do you get the most efficiency from your income? And I think we've got a lock solid way to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I know you did a documentary on student loan debt. That's also in the headlines now with student loans and debt and forgiveness and all this. So definitely want to touch on that a little bit too. Maybe start off by explaining what the SHRED method is and how'd you come about creating it?
So the SHRED method it's known, or aspects of it are known in a variety of different terms. So some people may have heard it as velocity banking. Some people call it mortgage acceleration. Some people call it the Australian method or an Australian mortgage. And effectively what we're doing, Marc, is we're creating interest rate arbitrage in a very technical standpoint. But what we're doing is we're using a home equity line of credit as a checking account. So your money literally gets deposited into a HELOC, and the SHRED method itself is driven by a piece of software that's written on a fairly complex algorithm that just makes sure you're gaining the maximum use of your income on a biweekly or monthly basis to save you the most amount of interest possible.
Okay. Can you take us through an example? Let's say someone has a $500,000 mortgage or a $500,000 home. What do they do next, or how do they get started?
Well, so as you know, and I'm sure your listeners do, if you're buying a $500,000 home, there's a certain amount of income that you have to make in order to be approved for that loan in itself, right? So we're looking at your front end debt to income ratio and your back end debt to income ratio. Front end being your mortgage, back end being all of the other monthly bills that you pay. That could be a car loan, student loan, credit card debt, et cetera. Anything hitting your credit report. And so ostensibly what happens is someone that has a $500,000 home is making more than enough money to cover that particular debt. And generally they have some left over. There's some discretionary income that is hanging out there. And for most people, Marc, where that discretionary income goes is to a checking account. It could go to a savings account. Some people may put it to money markets, but most folks will put it to investments. And candidly, Costco, Target, and dining out. That's where the majority of the discretionary money goes.
Sure.
So the way that our system works is every 2 weeks, let's assume that this homeowner is getting paid, and the amount of money they get paid is more than enough they need to live on for those 2 weeks' time, meaning they're going to have some surplus, some discretionary money left over. The SHRED method basically says if you deposit that money in your home equity line of credit, you will bring down the balance of your HELOC, and the system will tell you how much of that extra you've brought down can be deployed against amortized or compound interest debt. So mortgages, student loans, credit cards, car loans, et cetera. And the end result is your income becomes more and more efficiently used. So it's not just sitting in a checking account or a savings account earning 0.25% if you're lucky. It's actually being deployed against debts that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 large on, it could be 3%, it could be 6% at this point in time. But the overall amount you're saving is far more than you're paying in interest on the home equity line of credit.
So does someone have to take out this HELOC at the time that they buy their house, or can this HELOC be opened up at any point?
It can be opened up at any point in time. However, what I will say is that it is at its most efficient when you begin using the process closer to the beginning of your mortgage than farther in. So we'll often get people who will call us and say, hey, I've got a 30-year fix, but I'm 17 years in. Will this still save me money? And the challenge there is you've already paid the majority of the interest that you're going to pay on your mortgage. So the remainder of it, you're not going to experience the level of savings that you would have otherwise. But if someone's fairly new in their mortgage, they're a year to 5 years in, this absolutely will save them tens of thousands and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest by using this model.
So if I understand it correctly, let's say someone has purchased their home, they take out that HELOC, they're putting money biweekly into that HELOC, and then the algorithm will spit out and say, all right, we know all of your debts. You have this mortgage here, you have these student loans here, this credit card here, and it will say, put X amount towards this, X amount towards this, and X amount towards this, with the theory that over time it is optimizing and minimizing the amount of interest that you would pay.
You nailed it. That's exactly what happens. And I would add to that what it's doing is it's telling you when to make the lump sum payments, as well as how much to make in the lump sum payments down to the penny throughout the month. So what it's doing is it's constantly, through the algorithm, factoring in how much interest are you spending on that compound interest debt or amortized debt versus how much income is flowing through that HELOC at any given point in time to minimize the amount of interest that you're paying on the HELOC throughout the month. And this is where that arbitrage is really created. So what I often will ask people, Mark, is would you pay $5 in simple interest to borrow $100 if you knew that it would save you $2,000 in compound interest?
Right.
So we just do that over and over and over again until the point where you realize just how little you've paid in interest on a mortgage and how much liquidity you now have access to through the HELOC.
You know, you set this up by saying, you know, someone's discretionary income, they have money left over. There's bound to be times where they're not going to have money left over. Does that break the algorithm, or can they just like pick up the next month maybe when they're back on track and they do have money that is left over?
This is a great question and one that comes up quite a bit. How many months out of the year do I have to be positive before this thing just implodes on itself? And candidly, the answer is that so long as you are money ahead, you have more money than you have expenses on about 8 or 9 months out of 12, the system is working optimally. It's taking care of your debts in as efficient a way as humanly possible. If you go a month and you've overspent your budget, you've overspent what your income was, what will happen is the system will say, okay, we're going to slow down and probably even stop the lump sum payments to blast away debt in an effort to get back on track where the money you have coming in is knocking down the HELOC to a more reasonable number. So it, in effect, has its own braking mechanism in the software, and it's always keeping track of how much income you have versus the expenses that are going out.
Mm-hmm. And is it able to quantify the benefit of using this tool or this algorithm? Because I think that's a lot of times they'll either hear things or they'll see things, do this, do that. But what really hits home is when they can see or quantify and say, oh, the value of doing this or the benefit of doing this is this amount. And then, you know, they obviously look at, well, it costs this much to use the tool or to use the service. And then they can look and see, well, is this really beneficial or not?
Yes, it does. It quantifies the amount of interest that you'll save. It quantifies how quickly you'll be out of debt if that's your goal. And furthermore, it's calculating what your investments at the end of this process could grow to based on a very, very conservative amount, which is essentially the amount of interest you were paying on your mortgage. So I find that stories are a great way to illustrate how this works. And we had a gentleman call in. Actually, he had submitted a form on our website, and it was on a Saturday, I believe. I was in a hotel room and I got the notice and I responded to him right away. I said, hey, can we talk tomorrow morning? I'll run your numbers for you. So on a Sunday morning, I'm going through the numbers with this gentleman who happened to be a United States postal carrier. And he had plugged his numbers in, and I ran through the numbers in the software. So I was going through his actual scenario with him. His name was David. And I said, David, just out of curiosity, what is your goal here? And he said, my goal is to retire early. I'm just not sure I'm ever going to be able to do that from the post office. And I said, well, what would make it easier? And he said, well, obviously my mortgage is my largest expense. If I didn't have that, I'd be able to do this much faster. And so I ran his numbers, and what the system came back with was David would be able to pay off his home in 2.6 years. Based on his income and current expenses, he would have no mortgage payment in like 2.6 years. And David said, I feel like I'm getting emotional here. He said, do people get emotional about this? And I said, well, it's an emotional thing when you think about having no debt or being able to retire early. But it's entirely possible. This isn't magic, it's math. We're just using the mathematical principles of blasting away debt based on your income. And I think this is the key to this, Mark. Everyone, all of us, we want to know, how am I going to be able to retire? And am I going to be able to do it comfortably and with dignity? How am I going to afford healthcare in the future? Will I be able to afford a college experience for my kids? If we can answer those questions and we can do it in a really certain way, I think that intrigues people. I think that can be an emotional thing. And yet we're having a dialogue in parallel with people who are saying, but shouldn't I be investing my money? And doesn't have to be an either or. You don't have to do one or the other. You can do both simultaneously. Our goal actually is to create efficiency in the income, all the while helping people grow wealth as quickly as humanly possible. And so for those that say, well, I'm either going to go all in the market or I'm going to pay off all my debt. Well, what if you could have both? And you could do it really well and still live the lifestyle that you're currently living without having to resort to a beans and rice diet, because that's what the so-called gurus are telling us to do.
And you did mention, I think, earlier about investments and looking at a conservative return. Does it look at that side of it as well and say you should pay off this debt here or put some money towards this debt here, but then on the other side you should put money towards this investment that's generating X percent, and that would be the optimal distribution of your income, your excess income?
Correct. And what we will often do is we will run scenarios with people that will identify how much they're already putting towards Roth IRAs, 401ks, SEP IRAs, et cetera. And we'll ask them, what kind of a return have you seen over the last 5 years or 10 years? We'll plug that in as an average number. And then we can show them, here's the delta between continuing to do that and or maybe diminishing that by $100 or $200 and using that as shred money. How fast could you be out of debt and how quickly could you be contributing far more to 401ks or Roth IRAs to get you to where you want to be that much quicker? So what we have fundamentally is a really effective projection tool that shows, here's the projection of blasting away debt and of building your wealth so that you can get to compound interest that much faster. I think you would agree with this too, Mark. I would assume that's what we're all after in the investment world. How do we get to that point, that inflection point where the doublings that you're doing are so significant that, you do one or two of those doublings near the end of your working life and you're like, oh yeah, retirement's locked in because I have more than enough money at that point.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite books that I read is called The Value of Debt, right? You'll hear a lot of people who shun debt and they don't like it. And, there's some debt that's good. And I think there's also some ways to use debt to get to what you're talking about with that financial freedom and that, compounding and doubling of wealth. I can see someone using the shred method where they have all this student loans, credit cards, mortgages, but I think it can also be a solution for someone who maybe has a mortgage, but maybe that's their only debt they have in terms of, okay, how do they get from here to, that next stage that they're trying to get to? So it not necessarily is just focused on someone who's like trying to breathe from all the debt they have, but someone who also wants to maximize their wealth from it as well.
Yes, this is a great point. And actually an area of this method that I love talking about, because some people think, oh, it's all about just shredding your debt and why would you ever do that? The reality is that I look at my home as an asset and a tool for wealth building. And here's why. You mentioned in the intro that I paid off my house early and I saved $180,000 in interest. We've actually paid off our house. We're working on our third time in 9 years. So what we do is we blast away the mortgage. We redeploy the money that we just paid off. Typically it's in the tune of $200,000 or $300,000. And we put that towards investments that are churning a monthly or quarterly passive income. So we're doing a lot of real estate syndications. We run it all through an insurance, a whole life insurance policy, an infinite banking policy. So we're getting kind of a double dip approach on that as well. But every time we do this, every time we redeploy the funds into an investment, it allows us to refill the bucket that much faster because we have more income coming in. All the while, what we're doing is minimizing our expenses on a monthly basis. So every time we go deploy more money and it increases the income, we are achieving financial freedom that much faster. So for folks that are at the next level, maybe you just have a mortgage, what I would tell you is there's a way to use this method to forward leverage some of that income into investments like syndications, or even in the market. It could be in, if you want to trade options and those kinds of things, that's on you. I'm not advising any of that because I'm not licensed to. But if somebody is really skilled at how they're doing that, the equity that they have in their home becomes a liquidity pool for them to go participate in what I would call wholesale investments, right? Retail is all dollar cost averaging. Wholesale might be investments where you're putting 50 or 100 or 500,000 in, but you're getting a pretty significant return on the back end, and the risk is mitigated to an extent.
Yeah, I think you made a good point where you talk about, your house as an asset and as a tool to use. A lot of times you'll hear, in the financial planning world, that don't include the house in your financial plan, whether it's your retirement plan or as you're trying to build wealth, because you need somewhere to live and it's not, you can't use it. And the reality is you can. You don't have to sell it to use it. You can use it and leverage it. And there's different ways to do it. And I think what you're talking about is one way that you're able to tap into that and utilize that as a tool to build wealth over time.
Yeah. And can I give you a really specific example, Mark?
Yeah.
So in one of our clients' case, they had a $250,000 mortgage. They had a decent double income family income. I think they made, $110, $120 between the two of them. They had one car payment. And what we ended up doing is we shredded the car first, which saved them about $450 a month. And through that savings and using the income they had, we took a $250,000 mortgage down to about $60,000 in 2.5 years. Okay. At $60,000, and this was a few years ago, so mortgage rates were fairly low. And they had dipped even more so since they had started using Shred. So we got them, they came to me and said, well, okay, we're down to 60. What do we do next? And I said, the goal really should be, how do we take care of your mortgage payment, right? How do we just have your mortgage payment covered by some investment that you're doing? So we started looking at what if we did a cash out refinance of their house. And I think the interest rate was 3.25% or 3.5% at the time. Obviously, we're a little bit higher now. We're in the 6 and 7% range. And this is a sidebar comment, but when it's at 6.5 or 7, or it could be even higher in the near future, this makes Shred even more important, because the people who are getting into mortgages today at a high rate, they're going to spend far more in interest on their mortgage than they would have 5 years ago. So it makes a case for why we should be using this. With this particular family, we refinanced. We pulled out $250, I believe. So we went back to a $250,000 mortgage. Maybe it was $200. Their mortgage payment minus escrows ended up being about $850 a month. With $140,000, we put that into an investment that we helped align them with. And they're basically in a syndication of sorts, but they end up getting about $750 a month in cash flow out of that investment. And at the end of 3 years' time, they'll get their $140 back plus an additional $35. So they'll get $175 back in 3 years. With that $750 that they're getting every month, their mortgage payment is largely covered, right? They were at $850, they get $750. They only owe $100 a month on their mortgage. They're still using Shred, right, to get the 200 or 250, whatever their mortgage was, back down to a reasonable number. Now it happens to be about $90,000. At $90,000, and they're about 2 years into shredding, at $90,000 of the $850 mortgage payment, $600 of it is going to principal, right? So they're only spending $200 a month in interest, about $2,400 a year in interest, and their passive income is paying for the majority of that payment anyway. So this is a family that has figured out how to create massive amounts of equity and wealth in short order, and it's taken them about 4 to 4.5 years to build it. And they'll wake up in another year or two when that 175 comes back, and they'll have largely all of the equity in that property. and they'll experience, what could be a doubling of their net worth in that amount of time, and they haven't changed their lifestyle much at all.
Yeah, and that's when it starts snowballing from
and
there.
We do that a couple times. It's like a video game you can't lose if you have consistency and discipline.
Yeah. I know you mentioned that with interest rates going up, it's more important to focus on something like the SHRED method, but does it make it also harder for it to work now with the interest rates just exploding over the more recent time?
Where it makes it harder is the way we're borrowing money on the line of credit, right? Because the cash flow lines of credit generally are going to be a variable rate. It's typically going to be prime plus 0.7 or 0.1. So right now I'm seeing HELOCs at the 6.2 to 6.5 range. And if we can get a lower HELOC, man, all the more power to us. So I've got a credit union close by to me that's offering a 0.99% introductory interest rate on a home equity line of credit, and they'll lock it for 12 months. Now, clearly, they are trying to buy wallet share. They want people to come in and they want deposits and they want this new business. But 0.99%, if you just got a $500,000 mortgage at 6% and you could get a 0.99% HELOC, I'd do that all day long. And we would save massively for 12 months. And even if you did it for 12 months and then you shut down SHRED, you'd still save tens of thousands of dollars in interest in that first 12-month period. Your question, is it getting harder? It is a little bit because interest rates rise, but because they're rising in tandem, we're still seeing a major savings. It's just at a different level from 3% to 6%.
A lot of times, I think you mentioned it, you're dealing with people's kind of emotions about this a lot. And a lot of times you'll come across the person that just loves seeing that big balance in their checking or savings account. How do you go about talking to them and kind of not convincing, but showing them that, and for that person, is it that if they put more into the, let's say their house, they'll be able to take out a bigger home equity line of credit? Is that the thinking on how to show that this method would work?
That's part of the logic. And candidly, when I have this discussion with clients, if someone had $50,000, let's say, sitting in a side, money market account, I would say, hey, do me a favor, pull out your statement on that from last year. How much interest did you make on that amount of money? And they'll pull it out, and they made 0.25%, right, for the year. So it's next to nothing. It's not nothing, but it's close to nothing. And then I'd say, hey, do me a favor, pull out your mortgage statement, and let's look at how much interest did you spend in the last year. And they'll pull that out, and they'll show me the number. And I'll say, if the money is sitting in the money market account, how does it make you feel? And they'll say, oh, safe and secure, and I know it's there, and it's liquid, and I can access it any time. And then if I ask them, did you access it any time? And they say no. And I say, well, let me show you what would have happened if you'd had that money, or even some of that money, half of it even, on your mortgage. What would have happened to the amount of interest that you'd pay over the length of your mortgage if you dumped that in? And effectively what happens, Mark, is and again, using the numbers we did before, if you had a $500,000 mortgage and you put $25,000 down on that $500,000 mortgage, it would mean your balance would now be $475,000, right? But what would happen is you would go from payment 1 at $500,000 to probably payment, I don't know, 39, 40, 45, somewhere in there, which effectively means you've skipped 3.5 to 4 years of payments to get to that point, just like this. Well, let's say it's 4 years of payments and the interest on those payments were $1,000. It's going to be far more than that, but let's say it's $1,000. That's $48,000 in interest you just skipped by putting $25,000 down on your mortgage. And by the way, because you had a HELOC, you still have access to that money. There's a difference between availability and access, right? And available money is sitting in a money market account, and accessible money is sitting in a HELOC. The difference is the available money makes you none. Accessible money might cost you if you use it, but it saves you if you don't use it. So the question that I often ask people is, hey, you've got this chunk of money sitting on the sidelines. What is it there for? And I'll typically get peace of mind in case there's a problem or an expense that I wasn't foreseeing. Could be a job loss, could be any of those things. And I don't disagree. Those things are really important. And at the same time, I know a lot of people that keep an excess amount of money on the sidelines because they were told as a kid, hey, cash is king. when cash was making 12% in a passbook savings account. And unfortunately today, it's a melting ice cube on your counter. So unless there is velocity of that money somewhere, money just sitting there, idle actually doesn't make you money. It may be there for peace of mind, and that could be invaluable for some. For those that it is invaluable, I will often ask them, let's say there was a job loss, how long would it take you to go get another job or make the kind of money that you were making before? And there are some people, they could do it tomorrow. And then there are some people who would say, it could take me 4 months or 6 months, in which case I'll say, then it's probably best for you to have some 3 to 4 months of expenses sitting there on the sideline. But anything over and above that, why don't we put that to work for you and create some efficiencies where you're paying less in interest?
Yeah, makes sense. And this one may be even a more difficult conversation with people. You have the people that they hear this and they say, this is a great idea, but I have no extra money. People's spending habits get ingrained over time and they are tough to change. How do you have that conversation with someone about, well, this is what we would need to do to get it to work, and these are the changes that would need to be made?
There's an element of coaching that we offer when we work with people. From time to time, we'll get folks who do have more expenses than they do income. The way we like to put it is they have more month at the end of their money, right? Not more money at the end of their month. And our goal with them is to talk through, for this to work and to be financially solvent and ultimately financially free, you have to be playing really good defense and really good offense. And good offense is, we need to increase your income. So the first thing we'll focus on is, have you asked for a raise recently? Is there anything you can do to pick up extra money or shifts or what have you to make extra money? And then great defense looks like, let's go through all your expenses and figure out where are the errant expenses in your budget. So are you spending more on dining out, which tends to be the majority for most people? And I would go to even conveniences. Where you're at, Mark, I'm sure that DoorDash and Uber Eats takes up a massive chunk of people's monthly take home.
It does of mine. Yep.
Yeah. And so we'll often look at, hey, let's look at efficiencies and conveniences, and what's the convenience fee for some of these deals? Yeah. Because conveniences can take 10 to 15, 20% of your budget on a monthly basis. So what might we do to shift your behavior around limiting some of those convenience fees? And then obviously we'll go into simple and yet often overlook things like, can we reprice your homeowner's insurance? Can we reprice your renter's insurance? Can we reprice your car insurance? Can we renegotiate or recast your car loan? So if you've had your car for a while and there's equity in your car, can we recast it over the same 5, 6, 7, 8 year period, or even recast your mortgage over a longer period of time so that we can minimize the monthly payment that you have, allowing you to free up some cash flow so they can now go into Shred and start taking care of some of those monthly expenses. I would say that our team is ninja level at uncovering ways to save money and then ideating with you about how to create more income.
Well, Adam, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for being on the show. You gave some great tips on how to use the Shred method to build wealth. How best can someone reach out to you, find out more about what you do?
The best way to find us, Mark, honestly, is to go to theshredmethod.com. And if you have questions or you'd like to go through, more of a formal presentation with us, a 20-minute call often is all it takes for us to run your numbers through our scenario and tell you in a savings analysis, here's how fast you could be out of debt. Here's how much you'll save. The best way to do that is at theshredmethod.com or to email us at hello@theshredmethod.com.
Great. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks again for being on, and thank you everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.